This is a presentation on dynamic policy layers. Manage access control policy layers on the security gateway. This is a new ability in R82, in Quantum R82. Manage the layers of access control policy directly on the gateway via API calls without the need to use the management for every change. The contents of the layers, of the dynamic layers, are defined in JSON objects, and they are applied via Gaia API. Also, in order to track the changes that were made to the dynamic layers content, the API calls are followed by a list of policy changes, and audit logs that define the changes are sent to management or log server. The supported rule-based objects in R82, IP-based objects, host network, address range, and wildcard, dynamically updated object, dynamic domain updatable, all types of groups, network, application, service, application, category, and service objects, and access all, identity awareness objects. And the supported objects in the roadmap are data center objects, network feed, and time objects. Okay, now moving on to the demo. Okay, this is the current policy. It is installed on the gateways. There is one regular layer. It's controlled by management as usual. And I want to add a new layer that will be updated via API. So I'm adding a new layer. I will name it Dynamic Layer 1. And in the Advanced tab, there's a new section, Dynamic Layer, and a new checkbox, Set Add Dynamic Layer. Once I select it and click OK, I can see that the dynamic layer, the layer I created, has a dynamic attribute and a new message. The default content can be replaced on each security gateway. At the moment, before the first time I send an API request, the gateways will enforce the policy shown here. I will change it to accept it for installing policy. And once I apply content for this layer on a gateway, then the content will be enforced instead of what we see here in the management. So first I will install the policy. Now, before we send the dynamic content request, I will go over the option, the fields and options we have for setting the dynamic content API. So this is the part of the Gaia API documentation. We have the set dynamic content API. And it's a post request with the body of the request is a JSON that contains a few fields. The main three objects are the three below: referenced objects, objects, and access layers content. The objects and reference objects are used to define the objects that I want to use inside the rules. And the rules are defined here in the access layers content object. The difference between referenced objects and objects is that in the object section, there are types of objects that are fully defined in the API. For example, host, I need to set the IP address. And in the referenced objects, there are objects that are already defined externally. For example, applications, categories, updatable objects. services, predefined services. I just use their name in order to use them in the access layers content section. And the last part is the access layers content, which contains the layers and rules. It's a list of layer objects, and each layer contains name and list of rules. And each rule contains action, rec, source, destination, service. And in the source, destination, and service, we're using objects that were defined above in the referenced objects and objects sections. So here I prepared a set dynamic content request. The comments, I can give any value I want, also tags, and dry run says if I want to apply the policy or just test it. The default is to apply it. And as I shown in the documentation, we have the referenced objects. So in this example, we have first the name of the layer we want to modify. We can have multiple layers in the same request. We can update more than one layer. And one of the predefined services, echo request, it's an ICMP service. And in the object section, I created two objects. One is a host object called public DNS with the Google DNS IP, and a network object called client.net with this subnet and mask. And inside the access layers content, we can see two rules. First of all, the name of the layer must be identical to the name that we created on management, the name of the dynamic content layer. So we use the same name. And in the rule base, we have two rules. This is the first one, and then the cleanup rule. At the first rule, we see the name, we gave name to the rule, the action is drop. We want log in this rule, and the sources and destination are using names of objects that were defined above. For example, client.net, we can see it here. Public DNS can be seen here. And the echo request service that we have in the referenced objects. And the second rule is only cleanup except. Fields that are not provided will get default values. Source, destination, and service defaults are any. And the track is none without log. Okay, so this is the example request. And now before sending this request, I want to run a small ping for my client to the public DNS. So now we see that it's accepted because this rule was not applied yet. And now I will apply. Once a set dynamic content operation is sent, the response contains a task ID to track the status of the task. So I copied it, and I'm using the show task API to track the progress. I can see first the policy was applied successfully. Here status is succeeded. And then I have a change summary section that contains all the changes I made compared to the previous policy. So the layers I changed is one layer, dynamic layer 1. I created two new rules. And also I created two new objects, client.net and public DNS. Now I will go again to the client SSH, run another ping. And now we can see that it's blocked. And we can also look at the log that was generated here. Here we can see a drop log on echo request, and in the access rule name, we can see the new rule that we created via the API, ping to public DNS, and the rule number. Now I will make a change to the policy. So we'll go back to the set dynamic content request, and I will change the action of the public DNS rule to accept. And I'm sending the request. Tracking the task. We can see that it's still in progress. And now it is applied. Let's try the ping again, and this time it will work. And we expect an accept log. Here is the accept log. If we go to the matched role, we can see that in the first layer, it matched the cleanup role, but in the second layer, it matched the rule that we just changed to accept, the ping to public DNS, and it was accepted. In addition, we can see that the change summary now contains objects and rules in the modify section. In this example, we modified the action of these rules, so we see it in the modify section. And in addition to this, we also send audit logs for every change we made via the API. So in this example, we got modify rule log. And if we look here under changes, we can see that the action was changed from drop to accept. So like regular changes that we're making on management, every change is audited. We can go back and understand what changes were made. And last thing I want to show is another API called show dynamic layer. This API receives the name of a layer, and it returns the current status of the layer, the rules and objects of the layer. So in this case, we can see we have, first of all, the layer name is dynamic layer 1. We can see all the comments and tags we used in the last request. And in the object, we have a host, a network object, and the rules. We see the current status. So now the action was accept. If we change it to drop and check again, we will see the last status, which is drop. So in this case, the action is accept, and you can see source, destination, rec, and we also have rule numbers. This is rule number 1, and the cleanup rule is number 2.